Millions tuned in as Jasmine Crockett didn't just question Melania Trump. She came armed with records, dates, and dollar amounts that made the First Lady visibly falter on national television. The first thing people noticed wasn't the gleam of the studio lights or the polished set. It was the way Jasmine leaned forward slightly in her chair. Hands calm but ready. Eyes locked on Melania as if she had been waiting months for this moment. This wasn't just another Sunday night political panel. It was live coast to coast, with stakes far higher than anyone on stage dared to admit. The studio in Washington, D.C. was pristine. A half-moon table of high-gloss wood, 3 cameras, circling quietly, and a live audience scattered beyond the shadows of the hot lights. But anyone paying attention could sense the undercurrent in the air. Melania sat at the far end of the table in a crisp ivory jacket, hair pulled back with precision, the image of composure. Yet her clasped hands were just a shade too tight. Jasmine, in a deep cobalt blazer that pulled the camera's gaze toward her, radiated the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. The moderator, veteran anchor Paul Whitfield, began with polite introductions. On paper, it was a balanced panel. Jasmine Crockett, Democratic Congresswoman from Texas. Melania Trump, still First Lady after Donald Trump's narrow re-election. And political commentator Roland Chase. But those who followed the news knew this wasn't going to be a neutral exchange. Policy topics came first: immigration reform, education funding, trade agreements. Jasmine answered with crisp precision, weaving facts into each point. Melania's responses leaned on careful, White House-approved talking points. Everything seemed routine, until it wasn't. From the second camera angle, viewers caught Jasmine's occasional glance at a slim folder by her notes. She hadn't opened it, but her fingertips brushed its edge like a reminder. Inside that folder lay the reason this broadcast would be replayed thousands of times within the next day. The shift came when Paul asked about transparency in public office, a subject Jasmine had built her career on. Transparency, she began, leaning in slightly, applies to everyone who represents this country, elected officials, appointed leaders, and yes, even those who live in the White House. Melania's head turned toward her, expression neutral, but eyes sharper now. Jasmine let the silence hang just long enough before continuing. If the American people can't trust that their leaders or their leaders' families are being honest about their conduct, then every speech, every promise, every appearance is just theater. Melania replied calmly, "I think it's important not to make personal accusations when we are here to discuss policy, Congresswoman." "Oh, I agree," Jasmine said smoothly, "which is why I base my statements on evidence." Roland Chase leaned back with a knowing smirk. He could tell where this was heading. Jasmine's hand now rested fully on the folder. She still hadn't opened it, but the anticipation in the room was electric. The live audience leaned forward. Social media lit up. The camera caught Melania adjusting her sleeve, a subtle motion, but enough for viewers searching for cracks in her composure. Paul tried to pivot to another topic, but Jasmine's eyes met his for a moment before returning to Melania, her expression quietly unshakable. Melania's posture was flawless, but the faint narrowing of her eyes hinted that she was bracing for something she could no longer avoid. Paul turned to the First Lady, Mrs. Trump. "You've been very vocal about the administration's efforts on education reform. How do you respond to critics who say she didn't let him finish?" "I respond that most critics do not have the full understanding of the facts," she said evenly, her voice cool, controlled. "It is easy to criticize when you do not carry the responsibility of leading a nation." She ended the sentence looking directly at Jasmine, a deliberate choice. Jasmine leaned back, letting a small pause stretch. For a moment, it seemed she might let it go. Then her eyes flicked down just once, toward the folder by her notes. "I think responsibility She began slowly, means being open when there are questions the public deserves answers to. And I think the American people are smart enough to tell the difference between a smear and a valid concern. Melania's gaze stayed locked. Concerns should be about policy, Congresswoman, not about family matters. Paul stepped in quickly, sensing the tension. All right, let's keep this focused on policy for the moment. Roland Chase cut him off with a dry laugh. Paul, you can't expect people to separate policy from the people who push it. If we're talking about trust, character is part of that. Melania's head turned sharply toward him. She gave a tight-lipped smile, but said nothing. The air felt hotter. Under the studio lights, every shift of paper, every movement, seemed amplified. Jasmine adjusted her notes, but never fully broke eye contact. You know? Jasmine said, her tone casual, but her eyes fixed. I came here tonight planning to stick to the script. Bills, numbers, statistics. But if we're going to talk about trust, we can't pretend that trust begins and ends at the White House gates. Paul tried again to move on, but it was too late. Melania sat back, hands clasped in her lap. I think the American people want their representatives to focus on work, not gossip. Jasmine tilted her head, almost amused. You're absolutely right. Which is why what I'm talking about isn't gossip. She let the sentence hang. Melania blinked, slow, deliberate. It's documented. A murmur rippled through the live audience. Paul tried to regain control. Let's give the First Lady a chance to respond. Melania's voice was steady. I am not aware of anything that needs to be defended. My work is public. My schedule is public. Anything else is private, and I will not respond to rumors. Jasmine's reply was soft, but carried an unmistakable edge. Then I suppose this will be your first opportunity to respond to something that's neither rumor nor speculation.
Paul
shifted in his chair. Roland's smirk deepened. The crew behind the glass knew this was the moment that would trend. Melania didn't flinch. If you have something to say, Congresswoman, say it plainly. I plan to. Jasmine answered calmly. But when I do, I want it to be clear to everyone watching that I gave you the chance to address it first, without specifics. Damn. Tension wasn't loud. It was the kind that crackles in silence, where every word could light the match. Paul drew in a breath and pushed the conversation toward international trade. But for the first few seconds, neither woman looked away. Jasmine finally glanced down at her notes, then gave Paul a polite, surface-level answer. She closed with, of course, accountability applies not just to other nations, but to our own leaders as well. It was a subtle needle, one Melania couldn't ignore. The First Lady straightened, adjusted her sleeve, and delivered her final line with precision. That is why my husband has been very clear about his priorities. He works for the American people every day. Jasmine offered a small, measured smile and, so did I, that's why, she said. When I see patterns that raise questions, I feel obligated to address them. Public service means public answers. Paul leaned in, trying to keep things. Congresswoman, are you suggesting there's something that hasn't been disclosed? I'm not suggesting anything, Jasmine replied, her voice calm but deliberate. I'm saying there are verifiable records the public has a right to see, records that connect public actions to personal decisions. And in this case, those decisions affect how the first family is perceived. Melania's jaw shifted slightly, though her voice stayed even. I do not think the American people want personal drama distracting from serious work. Personal drama is one thing, Jasmine said, her eyes locked on hers. Patterns that suggest something deeper, that's another. Roland leaned back with a sly grin. Well, now you've got us curious. What kind of patterns are we talking about? Jasmine glanced his way, then back to Melania. Let's just say they involve unusual travel arrangements and financial movements. Nothing that would matter we weren't talking about the First Lady of the United States, but here we are. The room grew heavier. The audience sat in complete silence, every eye fixed on the exchange. Paul cleared his throat. "Congresswoman, I'll have to ask you to clarify." "I will." Jasmine cut in smoothly. "But first, I think it's only fair to ask the First Lady if she's aware of these records." Melania's lips curved into a careful political smile. "If you are referring to official matters, I am always aware of my schedule and responsibilities. If you are talking about something else, then no, I am not aware." There was a faint emphasis on that last no, and the audience caught it. So did Jasmine. "Interesting," she said simply. Paul tried to keep the conversation moving. Roland chuckled. "Paul, you can't unring a bell." The Congresswoman just dropped a breadcrumb trail in front of the whole country. Melania's tone cooled. "If people choose to focus on rumors instead of the work we do, that is their choice. I will not encourage it. That's the thing." Jasmine said, leaning forward slightly. "This isn't rumor. And it matters, because leadership isn't just about policies on paper, it's about credibility. Credibility can't survive if it's built on secrecy." Paul shuffled his notes, but the control of the room was gone. Jasmine turned her gaze to the camera. "Speaking now to millions at home, every American watching tonight deserves leaders who are as transparent as they expect ordinary citizens to be. And when leaders choose not to be, it's our job in public service to make sure the truth doesn't stay hidden even if that truth makes people uncomfortable." Melania lifted her chin. "I am very comfortable with truth, Congresswoman." "Then," Jasmine replied evenly, "you'll be comfortable with what comes next." The audience murmured low, knowing. Behind the glass, producers debated cutting to commercial, but the moment was too hot. There were still minutes left in the segment time. Time for Jasmine to land a heavy blow. She didn't throw it yet, though. She wanted everyone leaning forward first. Her fingertips rested on a closed folder like it was a loaded weapon. She didn't open it, but the message was clear. This matters. Paul tried to shift to Roland with a question on trade negotiations. But even Roland kept glancing back at the two women. When the talk died down, Jasmine spoke again. "Sometimes transparency doesn't come willingly, it takes a push. In the past month, I've received information not from anonymous whispers, but from documented sources. Sources the public would want to see." The audience leaned in. Paul hesitated. "Congresswoman, if this is about a specific allegation, it's about patterns," she said, cutting in. "Patterns involving travel that doesn't match official schedules. Financial transfers routed through unusual accounts, and dates that align with some very curious events." The camera cut to Melania. Her expression stayed composed, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the table. Jasmine didn't pause. "I'm not here to speculate about the when, not yet. But the what matters enough to put on the record, especially when it's backed by receipts." Roland gave a low chuckle. "You're saying you've got proof right there in that folder?" Jasmine tapped it lightly. "I'm saying I have records anyone with the right access could verify." Melania finally spoke, her voice cool and precise. "If you believe there's something inappropriate, Congresswoman, there are proper channels. Making accusations on television is not professional." "This isn't an accusation," Jasmine replied, eyes locked on hers. "It's an opportunity for you to address it before it takes on a life of its own." The line landed like a challenge. Paul stepped in cautiously. "Let's be careful here." "Careful," Jasmine cut in, "is how things get buried. And I think the American people have had enough of that." The air in the room seemed to still, the kind of stillness that comes when you know you're watching a moment that will replay for days. Behind the glass, producers looked frozen, though their hands were moving frantically across notepads. Melania leaned forward slightly. "You speak of public service, but this is theater. You want attention, not truth." Jasmine tilted her head. If it's theater, then it's one the audience already bought tickets for. I'm just giving them the scene they didn't expect. Roland laughed under his breath. It's the most tense segment I've seen in months. Paul shot him a warning look. Jasmine placed her palm flat on the folder, a small but deliberate act. I'm not here to embarrass you, First Lady Trump. I'm here to make sure every person in this country knows that power doesn't mean privacy. At least not when that privacy impacts public trust. And if we can't have that conversation here, in front of the people, then where? Melania's reply came slower. The public trusts action, not gossip. Good thing, Jasmine said evenly. This isn't gossip. A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience, half thinking she'd gone too far, half silently cheering. Social media was almost certainly exploding already. Paul checked the clock. 3 minutes until commercial. All right, Congresswoman. 1 minute to close. Then we move on. Jasmine didn't rush. When leaders think certain details are too inconvenient to share, it's usually because those details matter more than they'll admit. And when those details connect to public resources, public money, or public image, the public has a right to know. She looked directly into the camera, and they will know. Melania pressed her lips into a line, saying nothing. The silence felt heavier than any rebuttal. Jasmine let it stretch until viewers at home were leaning forward. Then, without breaking eye contact, she slid the folder closer. She flipped it open, slow and deliberate, letting the studio lights catch the glossy surfaces inside printed statements, highlighted notes, and unmistakable flight manifests. Paul's voice wavered slightly. Congresswoman, I'll remind you this is a live broadcast. I'm aware, Jasmine said, still focused on the documents. Which is why I'm only presenting information that's verifiably already in the possession of oversight committees. Melania's gaze stayed fixed ahead, but her fingers shifted in her lap. Jasmine lifted the first page and set it on the table between them, angled so Melania and the cameras could see. These, she said, are travel records. From last year, dates, destinations, passenger lists, all tied to flights categorized as official but booked. Roland's eyebrows lifted. Through private intermediaries. That's unusual. It's more than unusual, Jasmine replied, sliding to the next page. On several occasions, these flights list the First Lady as the passenger of record. But the destinations, they don't match any public schedule released by the White House. Paul tried to interrupt. Are you alleging I'm stating? Jasmine cut in.com, but firm, that the dates of these trips align with large, unexplained transfers between accounts held by shell companies connected to individuals under federal investigation. The room went still. Even Roland's smirk faded. Jasmine kept her eyes on Melania. I'm not here to accuse you of wrongdoing, she continued, but I am asking why the spouse of the president is on travel manifests tied to private entities. Under scrutiny on why those trips were never disclosed. After a pause, Melania answered. I take many trips for my work as First Lady. Some are private for my own projects. I am entitled to privacy. Privacy is one thing, Jasmine said evenly. Using taxpayer resources for trips that coincide with suspicious financial activity is another. Paul shifted uncomfortably. Congresswoman, we have to be careful about what we imply. I'm not implying, Jasmine said, turning toward him. I'm showing. She slid over another document, highlighting bank transfers. Over $420,000 same week, same cities, and each time. The public was told the First Lady was somewhere else entirely. The camera found Melania, her jaw tight. If you are accusing me of something, say it clearly. I'm saying the American people deserve to know why your documented movements don't match the official record and why they line up with private financial activity. Jasmine replied, There's an innocent explanation, now's the time to give it. Audience murmured louder. The tension filled the entire room. Melania sat back, her voice cooler. I will not play into political theater. My work speaks for itself. If someone wishes to investigate, they may waste their time. It's not a waste, Jasmine said. It's about protecting public trust. And leaders can't expect that. Trust if they hide behind it's private when the truth is in plain sight. Roland leaned forward. I don't know about the rest of America, but that's one of the most direct challenges to a First Lady I've ever seen on live TV. Paul glanced nervously at the control room. Someone held up a note. 1 minute to break. These documents are already with the Oversight Committee, Jasmine said, closing the folder but leaving it on the table. The public deserves to hear this now, not 6 months from now when it's buried under another headline. Melania adjusted her sleeve, eyes flicking to the camera. History will judge all of us. I have no concerns about mine. Then you shouldn't have concerns about transparency either, Jasmine replied. The moderator's voice cut in. We'll be back after the break. The music swelled, but Jasmine and Melania never broke eye contact. During the commercial, the audience buzzed louder than at any point in the night. Viewers whispered, trying to connect the dots. Melania's posture stayed perfect. But there was a new tightness in her mouth, the first visible crack. When the cameras returned, Paul's tone was heavier. We're continuing our discussion tonight with First Lady Melania Trump, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and analyst Roland Chase. Congresswoman, he said. Before the break, you presented some documents. Yes, Jasmine replied. Documents that raise legitimate questions about resource use and the accuracy of the public record. Melania leaned forward slightly. If you think this is a court, you are mistaken. The American people don't want gossip. They want results. They want both truth and results, Jasmine countered. Without truth, results are meaningless. Roland chuckled. I have to admit, this is a lot spicier than I expected when I got invited. Paul shot him a warning glance before turning back. To Melania. First Lady Trump, do you want to respond to the alignment between your travel and financial records? Melania folded her hands neatly on the table. I have commitments that are not always public. Do not need to explain every detail of my life for political theater. People who know me know my work. On paper, her words were calm. But there was a faint cutting edge in her delivery. One Jasmine noticed, and so did the audience. The cameras caught it too. I respect your right to privacy, Jasmine replied evenly. But this isn't about your personal life. This is about activity that intersects with public trust. Those flights and transfers weren't paid for entirely from a personal account. The audience reacted with audible gasps and murmurs. Melania's lips tightened. If there is an investigation, I will cooperate. But I will not respond to accusations made for entertainment. I'm not here to entertain, Jasmine said. I'm here to show the people who sent me to Congress that I take my job seriously, even when it's uncomfortable. Roland leaned toward Melania. Sounds like the Congresswoman is suggesting there's more here than just bad optics. It sounds like you're trying to stir more trouble, Melania shot back. My life is not a game. Paul, the moderator, stepped in. Let's keep this civil, he said. Though even he knew the exchange had crossed into territory most primetime panels avoided. Jasmine didn't look away from Melania. If it's not a game, then you should have no problem clarifying why. Those trips were routed the way they were, or why the destinations don't match official records. For the first time, Melania hesitated. It was only a second or two, but the pause felt like an answer in itself. I will not give details of every meeting or private engagement. That is my right. That's the problem, Jasmine said quietly. When leaders use that line too often, it stops being about rights and starts being about hiding from accountability. The audience stirred again. Melania's accent deepened. You think you know more than you do, Congresswoman. Ellis. Will pass. People will forget. Not if the truth matters to them. Jasmine countered. Melania's posture was still composed, but her voice had turned brittle. Paul tried to move the discussion along. We have more topics to cover. Yes, Jasmine said, without looking away, because truth usually does strike a chord. Roland smirked faintly. I can already see the headlines in the morning. The control room signaled there were still several minutes before break, too much time for Melania to recover fully, not enough for her to retreat. Jasmine seized the moment. If leaders want to keep the public's respect, she said, they can't let silence answer for them. Silence is only comfortable for people who have something to lose if the truth comes out. Melania glanced at Paul as if asking for a change of subject. But it was too late. The tension had shifted from simmering to volatile. Roland glanced between them. I've been on panels where the most exciting thing was a heated argument about infrastructure. This is different. We're talking about the First Lady's movements and finances being questioned in real time, with documents right here. Paul tried to rein it in. These are still unverified by independent media. They're verifiable. Jasmine cut in, tapping the folder before her. Oversight officials already have them. This isn't speculation. It's just earlier than the White House planned for the public to know. Roland gestured toward her. That's the kind of thing that makes a story blow up faster. Give people a live confrontation, and they'll be talking about it before the segment ends. Melania finally spoke again, her voice cool. This is not the way to serve the public. These are personal matters being twisted for headlines. Personal matters, Jasmine replied, don't get booked through official travel channels. And they don't align with public funds unless there's a reason. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. Even those who didn't follow politics closely could feel the weight of what had just unfolded. You could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about the accusation. It was about the fact that it was unfolding live, uncut, with no time for edits or spin before reaching the public. Paul glanced down at his notes and sighed. I want to be clear, he said carefully. Neither the network nor I have verified these records. Jasmine turned toward the camera, speaking directly to viewers. I encourage everyone watching to ask your representatives to review these documents for themselves. Don't take my word for it. Demand to see the truth with your own eyes. It was a line that cut straight past political filters and landed directly with the audience. That's what made it dangerous for Melania. Roland gave a small, knowing chuckle. I wouldn't want to be on the White House Comes team tonight. Melania's eyes narrowed, but she stayed silent, clearly measuring every word. Careful not to make a headline worse than the one already taking shape outside the studio, online. The reaction was building fast. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtag Jasmine V's Melania was already trending in multiple cities. Clips of Jasmine sliding the documents across the table were going viral, captioned with lines like, "This is how you hold power accountable," and "She really brought the receipts." In the control room, a young producer named Eric was flooded with texts from friends. Is this real? This feels bigger than a panel show. Back on set, Paul made a last-ditch effort to steer the conversation toward foreign policy. But Roland wasn't letting it go. With respect, Paul, I think the American people care less about trade agreements tonight than whether the First Lady's travel records match her story. Melania straightened her jacket. I have done my work with dignity and without scandal for years. I will not let political games change that. That's your choice, Jasmine replied evenly. But the public will decide whether they see this as a game or the truth finally breaking through. The audience gave a small, scattered applause, unusual for a panel segment. Paul tried to wrap the segment. We'll be right back after the break. As the cameras panned wide, Melania's stillness looked less like poise and more like restraint. Jasmine, meanwhile, carried the quiet confidence of someone who had said exactly what she came to say and knew it had landed. Backstage, whispers about possible calls from network executives were already circulating. Another guest scheduled. For the next segment, shook his head. Yeah, my topic's not happening tonight. The real aftershock, though, wasn't in the studio. It was in millions of homes and on mobile screens, where viewers were deciding whose version of the truth they believed. When the cameras came back, Jasmine was calm, composed, and razor-focused. Melania maintained her polished look, but her subtle stiffness told its own story. Paul softened his tone. Congresswoman Crockett, you've made some strong points tonight. Before we move on, is there anything else you want to say? Yes. Jasmine said without hesitation. Holding leaders accountable isn't disrespectful, it's necessary. The moment we decide some people are too important to answer questions is the moment democracy begins to erode. She didn't raise her voice, but the words carried. The audience stayed silent, locked in. Melania replied, I believe in respect. I believe in privacy. This is not about hiding. It's about protecting what is personal. Jasmine nodded slowly, and I believe in truth. And truth doesn't need protection unless it's hiding something. Roland let out a quiet oof into his mic. Paul tried again to mediate, but Jasmine leaned forward. This isn't about catching someone in a lie for sport. It's about making sure the public isn't fed one version of events while something entirely different happens behind closed doors, especially when those doors are taxpayer-funded. Melania faced the camera. I've done my role with dignity. People know me. They'll see this for what it is. I think they already are, Jasmine answered. The tension was unshakable. Roland tried to break it with a joke about the most intense Sunday night programming in years, but it only made the atmosphere sharper. Jasmine never raised her voice. She didn't need to. The control came from her calm, the kind that makes the other person appear rattled simply by comparison. Back on the topic of children's literacy, Jasmine let Melania finish before adding, and that's important work, which is why it deserves to be free from questions about credibility. When the leader isn't transparent, the cause suffers. Was subtle, but it turned Melania's own talking point against her. The audience caught it. Murmurs rippled through the room. Paul's questions became shorter now, almost mechanical, as if he knew the rest of the show was no longer about discussion, but about damage control. Melania tried to reassert herself. I am not concerned about political attacks. My life speaks for itself. Jasmine shot back instantly, and so do the records. No pause, no smile. Just a clean, sharp statement that lingered in the air. Roland leaned toward his mic. That right there is why this will be in every news cycle for the next week. Jasmine glanced at him, then turned to Melania. This isn't about the next week. It's about the next election, the next generation, and whether we're teaching them that some people get to live by a different set of rules. Even Paul, who had been trying to keep things neutral all night, had to nod. That's a fair point, he admitted. Melania gave a small shrug, elegant but dismissive. People will decide for themselves. They will, Jasmine agreed. And they'll remember who answered and who didn't. No raised voice, no dramatic gesture, just a closer that stayed with the audience. Jasmine had already anchored the perception she wanted. She was the one standing for transparency. While Melania sidestepped in the control room, the producer whispered to the director, she's won this segment, no question. The real victory, though, wasn't in the studio, was in the momentum that would carry through the next 24 hours. Jasmine knew it was already hers. The red light on the camera went dark. Paul wrapped the broadcast. The set erupted into movement. Producers, stage managers, crew rushing about. But there were glances half shock, half-ought what had just happened. Melania rose first, shook Paul's hand, smiled faintly for any lingering cameras, then left with 2 aides flanking her. The walk wasn't rushed, but there was an urgency in how they cut through the crew. Jasmine didn't move right away. She gathered her notes, slid them into her bag, and thanked the assistants warmly. If Melania's exit was about control, Jasmine's was about confidence, a calm of someone who knew she had just created a moment that would ripple far beyond the studio by the time she stepped into the hallway. Her phone was buzzing. Her chief of staff's voice came through before she could speak. "Twitter's on fire. You're trending in 6 states. CNN and MSNBC are clipping the segment. Fox is booking a panel for the morning to fact-check you." Jasmine allowed herself a small laugh. Let them, they'll only repeat the story. Outside the studio, a small cluster of reporters stepped off about fireworks, pounced with rapid questions. "Do you think the First Lady will respond officially? Do you have more documents than the ones you showed? Was this coordinated with anyone in Congress?" Her answers were short, measured enough to feed headlines without overselling. The documents speak for themselves, and I think the American people deserve to see them. Meanwhile, at the White House Communications Office, the mood was grim. Senior aides, press strategists, and lawyers crowded into a hastily called meeting. An aide slapped a printout of a trending hashtag on the table. Where was Melania? This is everywhere. People are connecting dots we haven't even addressed. The press secretary shook her head. We need to kill this before the morning shows. The longer it lingers, the worse it gets. But outside their walls, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Instagram was flooded with screenshots of Jasmine sliding the travelogues across the table. Captions reading, "She said receipts, sand, she meant it." TikTok edits paired the moment with dramatic music, racking up hundreds of thousands of views. In hours, cable news played the exchange on loop. On one network, a panel analyzed Melania's body language, wondering aloud about the split-second hesitation. Caught on camera, the battle had moved far beyond the studio, and Jasmine Crockett was winning it. Before she could even answer one question, Jasmine Crockett found herself fielding reactions to another. Conservative commentators dismissed her move as political theater, yet admitted it was devastatingly effective television. Late-night hosts jumped in with one joking. Apparently Sunday night was document drop day, and the First Lady got a surprise cameo. The audience roared. The clip raced across social media. Back in her hotel room, Jasmine sat on the bed, scrolling through. The flood of reactions, supporters filled her mentions with praise. Finally, someone with the guts to say it to her face. Even a few political opponents grudgingly gave her credit. Not my politics. But she handled that like a pro. Her chief of staff sent an update. 3 morning shows want you, one's offering the first slot at 6 a.m. Jasmine typed back, "Let's do it." Across town, Melania Trump sat in a private meeting with her husband's senior advisors. Her communications director carefully avoided the most brutal online commentary. "We'll release a statement reaffirming your initiatives and dismissing the Congresswoman's claims as unfounded," she said. Melania's face stayed unreadable. "They will forget this," she replied, though it sounded more like hope than certainty. By midnight, major political blogs had posted full transcripts of the exchange. Analysts debated the fallout. Would it damage the First Lady's credibility, embolden other lawmakers, or rally the administration's base? One thing was clear: the clip wasn't going away. And for Jasmine, that was the real win. The conversation had shifted, and she was now setting the terms. The next morning in D.C., the city was already buzzing before sunrise. Jasmine, up since 5 a.m. with black coffee in hand, flipped between 3 channels replaying the moment, each framing it differently. But none could erase the image. Her calm delivery, the folder on the table, Melania's tightening expression. Her first stop was Morning View, known for its politically diverse audience. The host didn't waste time. Congresswoman Crockett. Some say you blindsided the First Lady. Others say you did what too many are afraid to do. What's your take? Jasmine leaned toward the camera, voice steady. Public service is about trust. And trust means answering to the people even when the questions are uncomfortable. It wasn't a soundbite, was common sense. It landed exactly that way. By midday, her answer was being clipped and shared alongside last night's confrontation. What had started as a single segment was now a multi-day narrative. With Jasmine steering it, later that afternoon in her congressional office, she told her team, "Keep the focus where it belongs." This isn't about humiliating anyone, it's about making the point that no one is above answering to the public. Her chief of staff nodded. That's resonating. People from across the country are calling in saying they want more representatives, willing to speak up. That's the lesson, Jasmine said. If you see something wrong, say something. Don't wait for permission. The right moment is when people are paying attention. That evening, she recorded a short message for her social media channels. I know last night's segment stirred a lot of conversations, some supportive, some not, and that's fine. Democracy thrives on debate. But here's what I want people to remember. The truth doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to shout to hold someone accountable. You just need to show up prepared, speak plainly, and keep the focus on what matters. Leadership isn't about protecting your image, it's about protecting the trust people put in you. Her words spread fast, picked up by advocacy groups, teachers, and even a few commentators who'd criticized her the night before. The White House released a polished, measured statement from Melania's office. The First Lady remains committed to her initiatives and will not be distracted by baseless insinuations. She encourages all Americans to focus on solutions that unite us. It was aimed at moving on, but in the public eye, the moment had already taken root. That night, a woman in her late 60s stopped Jasmine on the sidewalk. "I don't agree with everything you say," she admitted, "but you were right too. Ask those questions. Too many people are scared too." Jasmine thanked her and walked on through the cold night air. The storm would pass. She knew, but the principle behind it wouldn't. Somewhere, someone who'd never thought of speaking up was considering it now, before bed. She posted one last message. Power answers to the people, not the other way around. Keep asking questions. Keep holding leaders accountable. The work isn't over. It wasn't a victory lap, was an invitation. Because the point wasn't that Jasmine Crockett could win a moment. The point was that anyone could div. They had the courage to stand their ground.